Welcome to the All In Podcast. This week we have Justin Roethlingshoefer, former hockey player, CrossFit Games athlete, author, and self-proclaimed data guy. Thank you for being here.
This is really exciting for me, and I love getting on and chatting, Natalie, especially with people who have like minds in a lot of this stuff. So excited to dive in.
Yeah, I'm so excited to nerd out on some of these things. I think like we were talking offline before, we almost had a power outage that almost stalled this. And I'm like, no, I'm so passionate and energized to talk about this right now. So I'm excited we've been able to make it work. And I'd love to start with, if you could just walk us through what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So what I do theoretically let me back up. You hear all the time people talk about high performance coaching.
Yeah.
But what high performance coaching has become is it's become commercialized and it's become commoditized. So the word high performance is, we got high performance mattresses, high performance clothing, high performance supplementation, high performance food, high performance coffee, you name it. And everything has just become this high performance generalization. Well, by nature, general and average is as far away from high performance as you could ever imagine. And so what I do is I utilize data, DNA, epigenetic, biomarking, and deep intrinsic information to create personalized programming, personalized systems that athletes, teams, corporations, entrepreneurs, executives can work off of to create the changes that they're truly looking for to optimize themselves, not just for the short term, but also for the long term.
I love that, because I think a lot of high performance coaches, they might just say, oh, I focus on the mindset or the psychology, but not very many actually bring in the data side. What kind of inspired you to do that and kind of bring your own flair to it?
Yeah, because I think it goes back to what I started to see in the field. It was all just anecdotal. It was all just, hey, this worked for me, or this is what Tom Brady did because he eats all a very 80% plant-based diet, so I'm going to eat an 80% plant-based diet, or this ex-athlete or this ex-entrepreneur, whatever, does this, so I'm going to do this. And that's what a lot of coaches started to talk about. And there became just these vast generalizations. And even when it's science-backed, where you're like, hey, this product is science-backed of what it does for this, and this, but how do you know that that is your chemical makeup? How do you know that that is your operating system within your body that is going to create the change that you need? We don't know unless we look into it. And going back to as many as 25 years ago, as a 13-year-old kid, I had the goal of playing in the National Hockey League, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what my obsession was. And so everything that I did at that age to kind of get there and play was all focused around, how can I be more consistent? How can I be the best version of myself? I knew I wasn't going to out-talent anybody. I was a dime a dozen player. I had talent, but I was not an exceptional talent. I was going to have to work to get there and have to be consistent day in and day out. And by making sure that I was monitoring my sleep, was monitoring my HRV, was monitoring my nutritional intake, was monitoring all these things and knowing my vitamin levels, knowing my micronutrient density within my body, knowing these things as a 13-year-old. I wasn't playing video games. I wasn't reading comic books. I was reading anatomy and physiology books. I was reading articles on HRV and white papers and studies to try and understand this stuff. And it really just then propelled through my career and through my undergrad, my master's degree, some of my doctorate work, and then into my continual learning, even up to today. It's just an absolute obsession of mine, is trying to figure out how to bring out and enhance the high performing individuals, or those who want to be the elite, because anybody can be elite. Absolutely anybody has the potential. Anybody has the ability to. It's the question of, are you tapping into the right areas that you need to tap into to unleash that?
I'm so glad that you said that and said that everybody or anybody can be elite, because that's really the premise of this whole podcast, is like going all in on yourself and betting on yourself, whatever it is that you want to do. And I think a lot of people look at the top athletes and they say, oh, genetics, or oh, is this, or I posted a video the other day about the stats of people in the Super Bowl and how many sports they played in high school. And people said, well, they played 2 or 3 or 4 sports in high school because they were just superior genetics. And I was like, that is just I don't like that mindset that people look at things in that sense. It's like you can become what you want, or at least pursue the top of your potential if you focus on some of these things. Because like when I started snowboarding, I was not good. And I started late, and somehow I made it. And that was similar. I was like, when people were partying after the competition, I'm going to go to the gym because I know that's my only chance to get ahead and do these things to make sure that I can try to compete with them when they have the natural talent and they're just relying on that. So I love that you said that.
No, you're exactly right, Natalie. And it's not that you can be elite in everything.
Right.
It's that you become elite in where you put your focus and your time and attention. And there's a lot of people that have genetical makeups that predispose them to being better at certain things.
Right.
And if you start to identify that as a young age, or even at a point where you or I are at now, in terms of our age bracket categories, you can start to focus and utilize the things you're predisposed to being really good at, or predisposed to functioning at a high level at, and going all in that area. And you're going to get a lot further along. However, in those areas, even once you decide to say, hey, I want to build X business. You can build X business if you go all in on this. You're going to be successful. The journey is not linear. The journey is going to be undulating. There's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. But if you truly want to build that business, you'll build that business. It's not going to be the business you think it's going to be today, because it's going to change over the course of time. Just like your snowboarding career, just like my hockey career, just like Michael Jordan's basketball career. Every single one had highs and lows on the way to the pinnacle and where you were working from. I mean, take your story, for example. You were a snowboarder turned CrossFitter and now traveled the world CrossFitting. You weren't amazing at CrossFitting as you were in your peak shape and peak performance for snowboarding. It just didn't work that way. But you set your mind to something and that became the obsession. But in nature, what I do is help people pull that out of them, whether their arena is snowboarding, whether their arena is the law firm, whether their arena is their home office as an entrepreneur, or whether their home office is the hockey rink. Like, it doesn't matter, because there's certain characteristics that are just built into winners, and we can deduce them down to 8 different factors in the way that we work. It comes down to nutrition, hydration, sleep, immune function, environment, stress management, and mindset. And if you're able to deduce them down to things as simple as that, all of a sudden, when we're doing the things that are going to make you be the most consistent version of yourself, your focus, your goal, and your drive, you can now be the most consistent person every single day. And that consistency, iteratively over a course of time, is going to create success. I always say talent will get you noticed, but consistency gets you paid. And so often we're trying to accrue talent, whereas we should really be looking to accrue consistency. And how do we do that?
Right. Because some people can be motivated and intense for a week and then they fall off. And it's that person who makes that 1% increase every single day that ultimately is going to be in the best shape 6 months from now, versus the person who was motivated for 1 week and completely fell off for the other 3.
Totally.
I want to go back to what you said with kind of, you see that Tom Brady is eating like this. So you're like, I should eat like this. And I think this is a conversation that comes up a ton in high performance. And I've been hosting like daily rooms on Clubhouse on high performance. And that's something that always gets touched on, is like self-awareness and intention. Because if you don't have that basis of self-awareness, and this is for everything, like even the social media consulting that I do, if you don't have that basis of self-awareness, anything that someone who is above you or someone that you're motivated by or looking at or whatever, like this top entrepreneur or this top athlete says, you're going to follow because you're like, oh, they're doing that. That's what I want to do. I'm going to do it. But you don't realize that, one, that might not be what they did to get there. That might be just what they're doing now that they're there. Or two, it might not be the best way for you. For example, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but there's not one best way to eat. There is many different ways that people can eat, and it's different for everybody based on their genetics and their makeup and what they can also just be consistent with. So how do you approach that conversation with someone, or how do you help people with that whole basis of like that foundation of self-awareness?
I love that. It's because it's a topic and a conversation I have with people all the time. And what it comes down to is we just start to emulate people in which we see, and we get to, let's take Tom Brady for an example, because I've dove in on this probably 5 or 6 different times now over the last 2-3 weeks since the Super Bowl, really.
It's a hot topic.
Yeah. And if we take a look at Tom Brady's career, Tom Brady wasn't drafted 199th overall because 198 picks before him were mistakes. That's not why. It's because Tom Brady we know today was not the Tom Brady who was in college at Michigan. The Tom Brady at college at Michigan, nobody really ever thinks about this or knows this, but Tom Brady really never played any snaps in college. He would eat nachos before games. He would enjoy a real solid night out with the boys rather than going to the gym. He'd stay up all night rather than going to bed at 8:30. And his body was literally, if you take a look at it, it's the most famous picture of his picture before the combine.
Even his facial structure from then to now different.
Just an absolute bag of milk. And that's what, and he did not look the part. And so all of a sudden he got to the league and some habits started to change. He started to get some formation of these habits. He started to get exposed to more things. Well, all of a sudden at age 24, he gets his first shot to play. He already had, he was a talent. He was good. He has a mind on him that allows him to be prepared and to enact in a certain way. And all of a sudden, then he tears his ACL. Let's not forget that. He had that major injury that had him off for an entire year. I happen to know one of his team members, let's put it that way. One of the people that are on his like body engineering team.
Right.
And when that happened, he basically redevoted himself to completely changing the way in which he did things.
Yeah.
And you start to see from that year on, he continued to build and build and build. And the other thing people don't realize is between the ages of 28 and 36, he did not win a Super Bowl. He was in the building stages. And all of a sudden, between 36 and 43, he won 5. And it was the time in which it took to accrue these habits. It was, okay, great. He eats 80% plant-based in his meal now. He goes to bed typically around 8:30, 9:30 every single night. These are all habits that he's built up. Why? Because he's been getting the DNA, the epigenetic, the biomarking, the gut biome testing, the regular blood analytics. He knows what his body needs. He's built himself up to this point of where he's optimizing his system. He's optimizing his engine so that when he goes out and people look at him, you're like, oh my God, you're better now at 43, coming on 44 than you were when you were 32, 24, 27 years old. And that's not a lie. It's because he has dedicated himself so heavily to his craft. He is so dialed in to those 8 areas that I spoke about, but not just dialed in on a sense of, oh, I'm going to do what the general population says, or I love, you know what, collagen is all the rave right now. I'm going to really start utilizing collagen and peptides. Are they great? Yes, I love them. I think they're great, a great tool. There's a lot of great tools out there. Sound machines are great for sleeping. There's certain mattresses that are spectacular. Saunas are great. Infrared therapy is great. Cold immersion is great. Plant-based diets are great. Meat is great. All of these tools in which we talk about all the time are great. But what is great for you? And what is great for you at the stage that you're at? And that's what we help deduce down, is that we help find what is great for you now. And then we get on a path to find out what is great for you tomorrow. And then what is great for you next week, next month, next year, so that the person you are today, the athlete you are today, the entrepreneur you are today, the talent output person machine that you are today is going to be better and optimized tomorrow, next week, next month, next year.
I love that. And I think there's so much more to that Tom Brady story than the resistance bands or just the plant-based diet, right? Like,
I'm telling you what, TB12 is a business for a reason. And it's all based around bands and plant-based protein, but that's literally it's a speck of sand in the beach. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You hit so many chords with that, especially with the story of the ACL. Like, for example, something I saw with members of the Canadian snowboard team is they hated to go to the gym. They hated to do any of that stuff, right? All of a sudden, they tear their ACL, and now gym, and everything is about the gym. And it was like, what could we have done to make you realize that before that happened? And that just, it boggles my mind.
It's a great point that you bring up. And a lot of it has to do with, if you come into any person's life, a lot of the times you see this slowly escalating level of success. Whereas, and you take just the average person's life, where you graduate high school, you go to college, you get a job, you enter the corporate world, you get promoted year after year after year after year. I'm doing what is supposed to be done of me. You take any athlete, for example, they go from junior hockey to college or to minor pro, and then they sign their first contract, and then they're in the minors, and then they work their way up, blah, 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 blah. It's that iterative cycle that everyone just falls into. It's just like, okay, I guess I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But there's a pinpoint time, something acute that happens. And this is why they always talk about, and again, talking in generalities, but when somebody says failure was the best thing that happened to me, the reason is, or that injury was the best thing that happened to me, because what happens is it interrupts the cycle in which we're in. It interrupts that iterative upward process that really doesn't challenge anybody. It's okay. I'm trying to get that next promotion. I'm trying to get that next contract. I'm trying to get onto the Olympic team, whatever it might be. But all of a sudden, when something changes, something puts an immediate fork in the road and says, hey, we have to change this. It's a wake-up call for a lot of people. And then they go, oh my God, I need to change the way I'm acting, because it's not going to get me to where I want to be, because I'm no longer there. That could be getting cut from a team. That could be getting an injury. That can be suffering a heart attack. That could be losing a family member. That whatever that acute moment is in your life that makes you aware that there is something greater that you need to do, something greater in which you're operating in. That is the pivotal moment where we need to grab onto that and start asking greater questions, start asking better questions. If we can ask more informative questions, we're going to get more informative answers. I say this all the time. We are all going to sleep. We are all going to eat. We are all going to work. We are all going to train or exercise. We are all going to be in some type of environment at every single point in time. We're all going to think. If you want to be great, why would you, if you're doing these things anyways, why would you not want to do every single one of these things great?
Yes.
You're doing them anyway. Why do you want to just do them mediocre? Why do you just want to do them average? Why do you just want to do them okay? Let's do them great. If you're going to be sleeping for 6 hours, do you want to get an average 6 hours of sleep, or do you want to get a great 6 hours of sleep? If you're going to be eating a meal, do you want to eat an okay meal, or do you want to eat a great meal, something that's great for you? If you want to going to be exercising for 20 minutes, do you want to do an average 20-minute workout, or you want to do a great 20-minute workout?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know about anybody else, but I want to be great. I want to be great in everything. And all of a sudden, if we can decide, and this is the biggest thing, the difference between good, great, and elite is a very, very fine line, extremely fine line. But when we can deduce that down to information, and information that we can apply to our life, it's almost like cheating, because we've been given the equation. We've been given the answers. Hey, you need to have this, and this micronutrient because you're genetically deficient in it, and thus it's impinging a system within our body that's not allowing us to perform at a certain level or think at a certain level. Okay, great. Let's optimize and let's start utilizing this, because now systems are starting to work in a greater way. Well, you're predisposed to having fast twitch muscle fibers. Let's dive into those and utilize those to the best of our ability and train the heck out of them, so that all of a sudden they can, again, shift us into a different degree rather than putting you into some other facet. How are we sleeping? Like, your circadian rhythm is naturally set up so that your optimized sleep window is between 9:15 and 10:20. Okay, awesome. Let's make sure that our night routine gets us into bed between 9:15 and 10:20, making sure that we're sleeping at this time. Because now our cortisol, melatonin cycles are going to be in line. We're going to wake up energized. We're going to have a greater efficacy to want to work during the day, really put in the time. The motivation comes around because we're doing things the right way. And it literally is cheating. It's a guidebook or a blueprint to you as an individual. And it's taking the information and applying it. Because if it was only about information, we'd all be billionaires with six packs, because there's more than enough information out there. But we know that's not the case.
Librarians would be the richest people in the world.
100%. Exactly. But it comes back to being able to apply it to our life in a very applicable way, and a way in which we can quantify and help direct us in the place that is good for us.
Yes. Taking action is everything, and knowing what's right for you, I think, is just so important. I'm loving this so much already. I want to dive into like some of those things, those 8 things. And I know that we can't really get caught up in generalities, because of course things are really specific to other people. But yeah, let's start off with sleep, because I think that's a big topic. What are some kind of keys that maybe apply to everyone for sleep, or some ways that people can figure out maybe what's the best sleep schedule or sleep habits for them?
Yeah, so it's a great point. So if you look at the literature, a lot of going back to the way in which we sleep and which natural circadian rhythms are, is it dates back to our ancestryhood. So we would rise with the sun, and we would go to sleep with the sunset. And so ideally, depending on where we are, and that's why, again, during seasons, we get more or less sleep depending on the seasons, and our circadian rhythm is meant to change. And so if we go to bed, we should ideally be starting to go to bed anywhere from 2 to 3 hours after the sun sets, and we should be waking up somewhere in that neighborhood of sunrise to maybe an hour and a half after. And what ultimately determines that is our schedules, what we prioritize. Are we on our phones? Are we on our computers? Are we watching Netflix? Are we so many things in and around us are starting to really, truly impact that, and are creating these negative sleep patterns for ourselves. So again, if we're going to go more into the generalities here, is it's figuring out. And again, here's a way that we can do it not general. So find 2 or 3 days where you are not having to get up with the clock, not having to really go to bed with anything, and really become aware of your body. And the moment the sun sets, wherever you are, give yourself a 3-hour timer and become very intrinsically aware. Don't watch TV, don't play on your computer, don't be texted, but get ready, get dinner ready, clean the house, do whatever chores you need to do. And then when your body starts to say, man, I'm a little bit tired, start to answer that. Have a shower, get ready for bed, maybe do some yoga, meditate, whatever it might be. And then go to sleep when your body says it's time to go to sleep. If it's 9:15, it's 9:15. If it's 8:45, it's 8:45. If it's 10, it's 10. But go to sleep. Make a note of what time that was. Don't set an alarm. Wake up when your body wakes up. Do that for 3 or 4 days in a row. You can take the average. That becomes your general window. And that's based on your natural circadian rhythm. Now, a way in which we can optimize that and reset our cortisol melatonin cycle is a simple 3-2-1 rule that I like to imply here. So 3 hours before bed. So if we find our optimal time to go to bed is around 10, 3 hours before bed, we don't have any more major meals. So 7 p.m., no more major meals. 2 hours before bed, no more sympathetic stimulating work. So whether that be work from our job, whether that be working out, whether that be something of that nature, we would just eliminate that as well. And then 1 hour before bed, no more blue light. So no more blue light emissions, no more access to blue light, no more TV, cell phone, anything, any screen time that's emitting that blue light. And then in the morning, when we wake up, within an hour and a half of waking up, we want to make sure that we're getting sunlight of some form of sunlight exposure, because the photoreceptors on our skin and our eyes allow ourselves to reset that melatonin cortisol cycle. We want to get some type of movement, because that again is going to get the lymphatic system and the lymphatic system working. So eliminating toxins from our body, but also resetting the cortisol melatonin cycle. And then we want to make sure that we're doing some type of grounding work. So getting some type of feet on the ground, some type of resetting of our body's electromagnetic field, because we are magnetically driven in nature as human beings. And so those are kind of the immediate quick takeaways that we can have that can help us get deeper quality, higher restful sleep simply by the habits in which we engage in.
Yeah, I love that. That's been a game changer for me, is the sunlight exposure. And like, I'll go out barefoot in the snow in the morning after my meditation, because usually, in the winter, I find it's a little bit easy to get up before the sunrise, because the sunrise does happen like, I don't know, maybe 7 a.m. Maybe I think it's a little bit, no, it's actually probably after 7 a.m. now. And so basically, I'll do my meditation, and then I'll go out on the deck, and I'll be barefoot in the snow, and then I'll try to spend time just looking at the sunrise. And I do find that really helps. And from what I've heard, that it helps with the circadian rhythm, and then releasing the right chemicals later in the day to go to sleep. And that's been something that I've been, kind of preaching to everybody, is like, get outside if you can, and just see the sunrise. I find, those days where you sleep in and it's so far after the sun has risen, those are the days where you just are groggy, and then you find it hard to get to sleep, and it just kind of goes into the cycle.
Yeah. And you end up chasing the day, and you notice that internally a lot of things are just all over the place. And so that's it's all science driven. The other thing that is really key, and a lot of things that actually might interest your audience, I think, is there's been a lot of EMF radiation, so electromagnetic field. And I remember I talked about how our body is one big electromagnetic field itself. And so things such as your phones, things such as your computers, things such as the bird, that the smart home where you can control your and everything. These are all emitting waves, your Wi-Fi connections in your homes. These things all disrupt your inner chemical balance that's going on. And so when that happens, it actually impacts you at a extremely great rate, and can cause cancer, can cause headaches, can cause long-term chronic illness, can cause sleeplessness, headaches, ringing in the ears, you name it. There are really high levels of chronic issues. And so things such as making sure that you have your phone in airplane mode when you're sleeping, putting your Wi-Fi on a timer and shutting it off at night, going fiber optic for your Wi-Fi connection rather than the typical Wi-Fi that we have, looking at your electric meter. And so right now, a lot of people are getting these smart meters. So
right.
The people who are reading them just come by with wands. They don't have to get it out of your truck, and they can read your meters. But if you get those smart meters swapped out, all of a sudden that radiation's gone. All that happens is the guys to get out of the truck. So look for the smart meters and get rid of them if you have them.
I've heard someone say that before, and I never really thought about it. I know where I live now, it's just like a fixed rate. So every month it's usually the same. So they don't have the smart meters, but I know back, at my old place. And then, for example, I'm sure where my parents live, because they live in the suburb, I'm sure they have a smart meter.
It's unbelievable what's going on in terms of all of these different aspects that can truly impact the quality of sleep in which we're getting, and those the EMF radiation that's just present everywhere. Just because it's the way in which our society's gone, is we've gone so far to that tech side that it's now impacting us in really, really negative ways. And just these little tips can really be things that come up to impact us. The other thing, I'm sure a lot of people have not looked at this. Look at your user manual or your user agreement on your cell phones. And they actually say in there, it is highly recommended that your cell phone never come within 1 inch of your body.
Oof.
And so if it is on your body, it's always on airplane mode for me. If it's ever touching, if it's ever in my pocket, if it's ever touching in any way, it's always in airplane mode. Otherwise, it's always sitting on a counter, it's sitting away from me, but it's never touching my body. And it's simply because of all the continual waves that are coming through. Not a great story, but a story that one of our clients had was their daughter always stored her phone in her bra, and that was it. And so one day she went to the doctor, and they found a lump and stuff like that, and it was on the left breast, and lo and behold, it was where she put her cell phone all the time.
I've heard something like that before.
It's not, I mean, that's not a coincidence. And it's amazing to see how we're using these things and ultimately affecting us in really, really negative ways.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've heard something about that before. And that, I mean, it's always something I think about. What's interesting is like, I'll put my phone on my body and not think about it. But if I put my phone, my dog is like lays on it. I'm like, no, get away. I don't want anything to happen to you. It's so interesting how we just kind of forget about our own health. But then those other people that we care about, we're like, oh no, don't do that. But I want to dive into, because I was telling you before, I had a few podcasts ago, I believe it was episode 67 for those listening, where my friend Liz and I were talking about this experience that we were having we were getting really high REM sleep. So we did a whole podcast on it, and we were talking about some of the things we were going to track. So rather than using, we both wear the Whoop band, using it for example, saying, how does our sleep impact our day? We were trying to see, how does our day impact our sleep with the REM? Because we felt we were always getting sleep consistency. We were getting 100% of the sleep that our Whoop would say. But night after night, our Whoop is saying, you got high REM sleep. This is making up for possible low REM sleep the night before. But we're like, this has been years of this. We have not had a low REM sleep. We're having, sometimes up to 50% REM sleep. So one, we're like, that seems kind of crazy. Like, is the Whoop off? But at the same time, we were also thinking, what is it that we're going through, especially in 2020, that could be triggering this really high REM for us? Is it that we're doing a ton of learning, a lot of introspection? And so we've been trying to correlate some stuff, but I have never heard anyone talk about high REM sleep. And so I've been trying to bring it up with experts, and like yourself, I'd love your takes, because you look online and everything is how to get more REM sleep. And for us, we're like, but we're getting such high REM. And all I see is, the only thing I saw, one study that correlated getting over 25% REM sleep night over night as being correlated with high anxiety and depression, because your mind is doing all that problem solving all the time. So we're like, how can we get that normal REM sleep? And is this even an issue? And if you've ever seen that before.
Yeah. So a couple things. One is, I'll kind of take a couple steps back. So anytime that we sleep in, I don't care if you're male, female, young, old, fit, fat, black, white, doesn't matter. Everybody sleeps in 90-minute cycles. Right. So it's 90-minute windows. And there's 4 stages that occur. It's light sleep, slow wave sleep. That slow wave sleep is a physically restorative sleep. Then you have REM, which is a mentally restorative sleep. And that REM sleep ultimately is where you have the highest level of brainwave function. Okay. And you've got your dreams that no longer occur there. That's really what that goal point is. And then you go through a wake cycle, and then you go back through it again. And it repeats over and over and over again over the course of the night.
Right.
Now, what happens is, if you are in certain brain waves throughout the day, if you optimize yourself and you end up being in different brainwave states throughout the day that help you get there. If you're a big meditator, for example, you're going to be able to get into these higher level of theta and delta brainwave states a lot easier, because when we are in any type of given day or time, like right now, we're in a beta state. Okay. So that's consciousness. That's that level of conversation. Then that level below, that's that alpha stage. Okay. Where we can get there with meditation, but it's kind of that recharge, rest, kind of lucid state that we're in. Then we go into that theta state, which is REM, deep levels of meditation, mental imagery, a lot of that focus point. So because you've been an athlete for so long, and my guess is that you would meditate often, you would mentally visualize a lot, you would do some type of mental visualization work when you were doing a lot of your either prep for the games or prep for downhill skiing. You spent a lot of time there. Your body was comfortable. It gets into those stages very, very easily. And then the last stage, which is delta, which is that deep sleep, that slow wave sleep, that dreamless state that we get into. And then the other side of the equation is gamma. That's that when you're in the zone, you're conscious, you're in it, but you're hammering away at work. And it's just like 2 hours pass and you're like, where'd the time go? That type of thing. So those are the different brain waves. And so what happens is, based upon what you're in regular, what you get used to. I'll take you for an example. Like I just said, you're used to being in that deep alpha, theta, maybe delta stage, not quite so much, but definitely that alpha, theta. You are going to naturally, when you sleep, get into it much easier versus somebody who's in constant stress, somebody who's constantly just going from one thing to the next, 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 constantly in that sympathetic state, that sympathetic overload. If you look at their work in times of what they're doing, not to mention that their environment is probably not great, their stress levels are probably not managed very well, they're going to have a much higher affinity of light and of light sleep, pretty much because they're just going into that, coming out of beta, going into alpha, then touching into theta, maybe even a little bit of delta, and then coming back out of it. And so that's the whole concept of why you're getting more of that, is just simply because it's been a learned practice, a learned skill for you. It goes back to the generalizations that we hear all the time. Meditation is good for you. You should meditate for 10 minutes a day. It's not wrong, but why should we meditate? Someone says, I don't want to meditate. I'm not stressed out. I feel fine. Well, actually, we should be meditating for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, because it's actually going to help us sleep better at night and get into these stages of REM and slow wave sleep, which are the two restorative stages of sleep, the meaningful stages of sleep, much faster and stay there much longer. Thus, over the course of a week, over the course of a month, over the course of a year, we're building up and accruing this sleep bank that ultimately is giving us the advantage over somebody else. Well, all of a sudden you tell them that, and then you start to understand where they are from a brainwave state, where they are from a stress state, where they are DNA and epigenetically from how stress affects their body. Do they show physical symptoms? Does stress affect sleep? Does stress affect caffeine sensitivity? Does it affect any of these things? And if it does, well, now we can start to prescribe certain types of meditation and certain types of mental imagery. And that helps, again, level up what we're doing, continually tweaking the system, continually getting more information and more detailed on what we're having come through. And so, and then whenever you give the why behind things, people are much more likely to buy in, much more likely to do it. And it all comes down to that communication factor.
Yeah, I love that, because I'm going to bring this exact conversation and go tell my boyfriend, who refuses to meditate, but he has really, really light sleep. We'll sleep in the same bed, and my disturbances is like 3 or 4, and he has like 17. Yeah. And it's like, well, what were you doing? And it's just so crazy. I have the high REM. He gets pretty low REM on average, and what he noticed, which was odd, is every time on his whoop that he puts in that he had a beer, his recovery and sleep is amazing. And I'm like, how? Like, mine is the exact opposite, right? But for him, maybe that's putting him immediately into this relaxed state or pattern interrupt when he has that rare beer that somehow is, we would think that it would probably not impact your sleep well, but for some reason for him, it's consistently helping his sleep, but only because maybe he's just in this pattern of going, doing, and maybe it puts him in this relaxing, just chill state for a while.
And so it's funny you bring that up, because alcohol is naturally going to actually reduce our ability to get into deeper waves or deeper stages of brainwave function, deeper levels of sleep. It's actually going to inhibit that. Right. But what happens is it's not the alcohol that's doing that to him. It's kind of exactly what you just said. The alcohol is thus creating an effect for him. It's just like the smoker. Somebody may go and smoke, and we all know what it's doing to your lungs on the inside. We all know what it's doing to your body. We all know the addictive processes and the tar and the carcinogens and everything that you're taking in.
Right.
That's not relaxing the person. But what is it's the deep breaths that they're now taking. And so by nature, the habits in which they start to do simply by doing the action that's unhealthy is helping them get into those areas. So my guess is that when he's engaging in having a beer, he's probably not having a beer and running from his laptop to his phone to making dinner to this to that. He's probably having a beer, maybe sitting down on the couch, having a conversation with you, relaxing a little bit more, kicking his feet back, and just enjoying things. But because he does that so seldom, he's not able to tap into that.
Right.
And I've had this conversation with so many people, especially at the executive level, where they just go, and they actually turn in. They can drive themselves in the way of alcoholism, because they're like, hey, I come home at the end of the day and I have 2 or 3 beers and I feel so much better. And it's not because it's not because of the alcohol. I want to get that out of people's heads. It's not the alcohol which creates that, because you're not under a table every night.
Yeah.
But what it is it's the act of what do you do when that happens? I said, do you take meetings at 9 o'clock after you've had a couple beers when you come home? Are you sitting there and are you physically answering emails and stuff? Well, no. Whenever I open up a beer, I cut every tie off from the office, and I do that 3 to 4 days a week because I need to do that. Great. What if we were just able to put that line in the sand and cut the ties from those stressful situations without the addition of the alcohol? Because that's all it is. It's a change in environment. It's a change in habit that's taking us and getting the physiological effect. And to be honest with you, we can go deep into this, is it all comes back to the HRV. It all comes back to your heart rate variability. It all comes back to that intrinsic monitoring of that one key metric that is a internal metric load of stress or sympathetic overload on the body. Because our body doesn't know the difference between mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, any other type of stress. It just sees it as stress. It sees it as one key topic. And thus our body's going to react accordingly. So if we have a way in which, and a system and a default to which we're going to move into, that's ultimately going to help us, again, create these habits that are right for us and get us the results that we're looking for.
I love that you brought up HRV, because that's exactly where I want to go with this is touch on HRV, because I think it's something that I haven't talked with anyone on the podcast yet. But going back to the alcohol thing, like when I was competing, I never drank. Like I actually, when I turned 19, I didn't drink till 21, I think. I took 2 years because I thought that was my way to get ahead of, my fellow snowboarders that were partying and doing things. And then when I found when the pandemic happened, I did enjoy having a craft beer one night a week, or maybe a glass of wine another night a week. And but then I was like, because I know what it does with recovery, that I was like, I don't want to do this, even if it is just the one drink. But I do like how it makes me feel with the getting relaxed and cutting ties from the workday and being in this state. So what I did was I bought non-alcoholic beer. And I bought that recently, and I found it triggers the same circuitry. I drink that beer when it's like the cutoff, and I'm like, oh, let's just relax. And I find that it taps into that same of like cutting off the day and just chilling and progressing. And so then I don't have to have this alcoholic beverage. It kind of inhibits the same, circuitry in my brain, I find, just to have that non-alcoholic beer and replace it.
Totally. And there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different things that you can put in there to kind of create that same effect. But the reason I love coming back to HRV is that HRV is such a unique number for us and such a unique metric, is because it's not your heart rate. It's not something that can be changed based off of just the environment in which you're in, but rather, it is the timing in milliseconds between the R waves of the time in which the heart beats. And so it has a truly systemic, I guess, overhaul of the way the vagus nerve is affected to the heart, which is affected to the lungs, which is affected to the brain. And that whole circuitry that happens in there allows us to understand the stress load that our body feels, even though we may not cognitively understand that we are under a stress state. And so because of the sensitivity of that measure of HRV, we can start to really get a really unique number. And this is where I'll start to open up on all the wearables. I'm obviously, like I said, the self-proclaimed data guy. I've loved it for as long as I can imagine. And so I'm a wearable nerd. I love DNA. I love epigenetics. I love biomarkers. I love all these things to give us information to apply to it. But what a lot of people don't know is that your wearables are very highly unreliable. I've got a BioStrap. I've got a Whoop band. I've got an Oura ring. I've got a polar heart rate monitor. I've got, you name it. I've got about 4 or 5 on me at all times. Why? Because I want to know more. So for example, the other day I did a workout that was very intense in nature, very intermittent or interval based. It was about 40 off a heart rate monitor. Okay. The heart rate monitor got me to 587 calories, an average heart rate of 133, and a peak heart rate of 179. Then one of the monitors on my wrist had me at 243 calories, had me at a peak heart rate of 165 and an average of 123. I did a whole piece of content on this. Then the other one on my finger had me at 327 cals, 169 peak and 130 average, something of that nature. Okay. And then I had another wearable that had me again. It was a different series of numbers. But if you notice, not one of them were the same.
Yeah.
My calories were anywhere from 580 to 230, like vast difference.
I ignore calories completely on the wearable.
One peak heart rate of 179 to 162 or something like that. And then average was different as well. Well, all of a sudden, you start looking at this information, and depending on the wearable, they'll give you strain scores, they'll give you training load scores, they'll give you output scores. What does that matter? Why are we looking at that? What information is that giving us, knowing that it's incorrect?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the heart rate strap that's connected to me is the gold standard. I know that my peak heart rate was 179. I know that my average heart rate was 143. Why? Because I was wearing a heart rate monitor. I know what it was. It's directly correlated to my heart. They're the gold standard. There's nothing that beats them. So why am I looking at everything? But here's the key. And here's the key thing that is incredible. The next morning, guess what my HRVs were saying?
Were they all the same?
88, 89, 90.
Wow.
Every single one of them. So even though all the BS on the outside that's going on, you're looking at all this stuff, confusion, I often say, if you can't convince somebody, you confuse them. If you cannot, I'll say it again, if you can't convince somebody, you confuse them. Because at the end of the day, the person that's trying to do the confusing or the convincing doesn't know it well enough anyways to be able to truly get you to understand. So they just try to confuse you, and you're, I guess he's right, or I guess she's right.
Yeah, you see that a lot in the marketing world.
All the time. And so what ended up happening is you take that HRV metric, and that is what drives your decisions. And when you can simplify it down or deduce it down to one key metric that now is based upon 8 series or 8 systems within the body that I spoke about earlier, and those habits in which are driving that, then everything else doesn't matter. The intensity of your workout, it doesn't matter because it's going to be reflected in your HRV. Yes. And that's what's going to help guide where we go. The amount of sleep that you got in terms of total quantity time, sure, it's great to look at it. But again, the efficiency, the efficacy of it doesn't necessarily matter because it's going to be derived and told to you whether it's been accurate, adequate, or sustainable or not through your HRV. The food you're eating, we know that there's certain amounts that are appropriate. We know that portion sizing is important. We know that quality is there, that needs to be there. But again, we're looking at it based off of HRV because it's going to have an effect on us. Now, is it important to get your DNA testing, your epigenetic testing, and dive deeper into what you truly need so that we can identify that on a greater level? Yes, that's another level down. But for just getting into it, for just looking into it, for just starting to understand things, HRV will be that metric in which you can create it on anything that you have.
Wow. I'm going to look closer at the HRV because it's something that I always struggle with. For example, I ignore the calories in the Whoop because it will literally, I'll work out all day and be like, oh, you need to eat 1,800 calories. I'm like, that should be my basic metabolic rate. When my nutritionist used to give me like 3,000 calories to eat in a day, my Whoop would say way less, and versus I would still be getting leaner. And I was like, well, this just doesn't make any sense. So I kind of throw that out. But then I've been noticing lately, like depending even how I'm wearing it or just different things, it's like I do a really hard CrossFit workout. And if it's a fast sprint, it's like, it'll tell me my workout was such a low strain. And I'm like, especially you're on a team, on your Whoop team or a scoreboard, and you're like, well, people are going to think I do nothing all day. But it's just like, for some reason, it keeps telling me I have a super low strain versus, my boyfriend will do the same workout. And of course, maybe I'm fitter in that workout. Definitely there's variations there, but it's like my heart rate was much higher than what it said. And I just know that from feeling what it was, and
that's where we come back to all the time is, as much as I use data, as much as I'm the data guy, every piece of data, every piece of information comes back to utilizing it and applying it. So it increases that level of self-awareness. It increases that level of understanding it. It brings that subjectivity, or it brings some type of context, some types of quantifiable metric to subjectivity that thus then is able to be applied and harnessed in a very, very impactful way.
Yeah. So what can people, like, what do they look for in their HRV, and how can they maybe improve, or what to know? Because a lot of things come out and they say, well, I see Brooke Wells, she posts and her HRV is like 160 something. I'm like, does she have no stress in her life? And my HRV is horrible. Like, it's chronically just not great, even though I do all the meditation, I get the good sleep, and it's just always been that way. And so for me, I'm like, well, as much as I see that what puts out articles and they say, well, don't think about what this other person has. This is just your metric, and see what it compares to your average. At the same time, I'm like, well, why does this person have this and I have this? Like, how can I improve, or what should I even be looking at?
Yeah. So there's 8 factors that very heavily affect HRV. And I touched on them a little bit earlier. And we've created a very unique process and system in which we individualize that for people to create massive change in their life and energy overhauls, which really has become special. But the interesting thing is, I don't necessarily disagree with that HRV is an extremely individualized metric. It's an extremely sensitive metric that moves. And we want to look at the trend. We don't want to look at it day to day to day, but we want to look at the trend. If you're down extreme or you're up extreme, start to think about, what did I do yesterday that mattered? What did I do yesterday that impacted that? And that's where we go back to those 8 different areas. So exercise, nutrition, hydration, sleep, stress management, immune function, environment or ecosystem, and mindset. And those 8 factors are what impact HRV, straight up. There's nothing else that impacts it. It's all within those 8 areas. And if we can get truly identified and create those ideas around that. So did we exercise yesterday? Was the intensity greater or was it less? And in your case, I don't know the frequency in which you're training or the intensity in which you're training, but you could theoretically be overtraining in a certain aspect. And that HRV metric coming back to us is saying, hey, we can still lift or we can still do something, but we need to tone down the intensity at which we're doing it at to allow that rebound in HRV. So that's 1. 2 is, again, comes down to whole foods, comes down to, and I have another 3-2-1 rule. 3 meals a day, 2 pieces of fruit a day, 1 big salad a day. Are you hitting that? Are you doing that? All high quality food. Hydration, half your body weight in ounces. If you're not hitting half your body weight in ounces, you're missing out big time. 75% of our body is made up of water. 85% of our key organs, brain, lungs, and heart, are made up of 85% water. If we're not hitting half our body weight in ounces, we're dehydrated. We're living in chronic dehydration.
Right.
Stress management. If we don't have some area to alleviate the stress that's going on in our body, then we're just simply holding on to it. We're in that sympathetic overload chronically all the time, like I spoke about. Sleep, if we don't have a routine at night to be able to get into the optimal stage of sleep, if we're ignoring the circadian rhythms that naturally happen in our body, we're not going to be, again, optimizing ourselves in any way, shape, or form. When we go into immune function, we see a 3-day decrease in HRV. It tells us right away that our body needs some type of help to improve that immune function. And if we're not doing that, if we're don't have something immediately there in order to help us, and we can find that through what we're deficient in, through our DNA epigenetic test, then we need to move away from that as well. Environment or ecosystem, kind of went over that a little bit as well, like with the EMF radiation that's going on, with what our bedroom should look like when we're sleeping, what just having a dirty room or a dirty kitchen, or the types of people around us, sound pollution, all these things. Check your environment that you're in constantly, especially now that you're at home. And then from the mindset piece, it's the way you think, the way you talk to yourself, the people in which you engage with. My fiance does some amazing mindset work, amazing leadership work, where she's taken all these different assessments, some that she's created, some that she's worked with a lot of doctors to create, where you're talking about 100, 150 white pages on a lot of this stuff that all of a sudden quantifies the way we think, quantifies leadership, quantifies communication. And so when we start to identify the mindset and ways in which we're operating, the choices that we're making and how we communicate and how we show up, there's a 7 scale in which he talks about. The bottom 2 levels are catabolic energy. Top 5 are anabolic energy. Catabolic being more focused on that sympathetic nervous system, sympathetic activating, where anabolic more on that parasympathetic side. So again, going back to that stress management factor where our mindset controls and is done elicited a lot through our HRV. So it's understanding those 8 areas that I just kind of went over really quickly, but being able to then have a system and operate it of to what that looks like and how it's applied to our HRV to optimize ourselves long-term. And we get more and more and more and more detailed and more efficient. And it's amazing the overhaul that happens over the course of those iterative steps that we started talking about at the beginning.
Wow. And so do you see, like, for when you work with people, is it just to see, okay, we want your HRV, let's say you always are getting maybe a 70. So we want you to be at like that 70, or is it really like working on all those pieces to increase it till all of a sudden 160 is their average?
So it's not uncommon. We've had people that have been as low as 9 continually, like when they started, like
I thought I was bad, but 9.
Just 9, like, and all of a sudden now they're at 92,
Wow.
where it's not uncommon to see 92, but their average is say 80, it takes the course of time to create these habits that start to elicit this, and it's your body saying what you're doing is not working. But because our body is looking for homeostasis, looking for this level of neutrality, something that's by definition, homeostasis is the norm where you live on average. That's what your body's looking for, a level of consistency. Even if that consistency is not optimal for your body, it will try to live there. So if you live in a chronic state of stress, that becomes your norm, and it doesn't seem out of the norm to you. Perfect example. When's the last time you went on vacation? You go on vacation, you start sitting on the sand. The first day there, you have a massive level of anxiety because you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? Your body doesn't feel that sense of stress that's typically on you. And so that puts your body in a state of allostosis, which is trying to seek out the level of homeostasis. And so all of a sudden, if you're in allostasis continually, it's going to level up somewhere. And if your body was always programmed to be, okay, I just want to be rest, digest, relaxed, it would be in a constant state of seeking that level. But because you're constantly stressed, you're not going to find it. And so when you go and sit on the beach, it's like, oh my God, this is new. And it takes you 2 to 3 days to actually settle in and feel like, okay, yeah, this is really good. But then when you go back to the grind or back to the stress and the everyday habits in which you had before, you go back through that level of anxiety and like, oh my God, I can't handle this. It's like, but then you settle back into that routine and that becomes the norm. And so it's that awareness factor that your body will always go to where it's comfortable and what it's continually being put on us day in and day out. If we're not careful about what that is, that has an ability to absolutely crush us long term.
Yeah. Wow. That brought up a lot of things. So like on this podcast, we've had a lot of athletes talk about the transition outside of sport. And for me, that's something in my story that was really difficult, like loss of identity and all these things outside of sport. But one thing that was major was when I talked with my therapist after, he brought up something similar where he said, for me, I was getting, trying to find stress in relationships with friends, like picking arguments about nothing, or thinking, oh, you don't like me because of this or whatever it was, or different things in my life and dealing with the mental health I was. And he was like, well, think about it. You spend every day in this high adrenaline stress state of snowboarding, like fearful, like you're going to hit this jump and all these things. All of a sudden you don't have that anymore. And your body is trying to find some way to get this stress response in everyday life. And I think that goes for anyone who's experienced trauma or they're recovering from anxiety, depression. There's our bodies, if we've lived in that for so long, they try to go back to that.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And that's literally what it comes down to. And so your body will live in this sense of this state of seeking, this chronic state of stress, just simply because it doesn't know any better. And it's going to continually look for that because that is the norm in that space.
Yeah. Is it similar to like when we were talking about Tom Brady with his ACL, and that was like the moment that like snaps you into, okay, I need to take care of these things. Is there a moment that people can do? Like, is there something that happens? They reach burnout and all of a sudden things need to change, or can they kind of snap themselves out of it and be like, hey, I need to work on these things?
You always hope that it happens before a catastrophic event happens.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, they need that wake up call. They need that big aha moment. They need that heart attack. They need that mental nervous breakdown. They need they need their wife to say that they're leaving them, or their husband to say that they're leaving them, or they need their kids to get mad, or they need an injury to happen, something of that nature. And I'm talking obviously both from what I've seen from the executive world, business world, entrepreneurial world, as well as the athletic world. But oftentimes and that's quite often where we come in, is if we can create the awareness to what's going on and the habit patterning and the triggers that are going on, we can all of a sudden create this system or pattern interrupt quicker before that catastrophic event happens, and reroute the path to, I hate this word, but to high performance much quicker.
That's awesome. I love that. And everything we've talked about, man, I feel like we could nerd out about this all day, but respect your time and really appreciate you coming on and sharing these tips. There's a couple quick questions I like to ask everyone at the end, and maybe we'll do this again and we can dive into some other pieces of those 8 things that can help people. But for one thing, and I think this would be a kind of a cool question to ask you, who focuses on so many things. So I ask everyone, what is one daily habit that you do that is the biggest game changer in your life? And I know there's so many things under all those categories, but if you could pick one, what would that one be?
Go to bed at the exact same time.
I've heard that lately. The consistency matters even more than, the length of time that you're asleep.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's number one.
Awesome. So this next question, I've been tweaking it and changing it recently, because I always ask, I say, when you're, say, 100 years old, you're looking back on your life, what would you want your legacy to be? And one of my latest guests challenged me on that. And I thought it was really interesting, where he was saying, most of us, unless even Shakespeare, there's just a little bit of Shakespeare's writing that we remember, but we don't really remember him as a person or these things. And so the concept of legacy, and this was someone who was quite an accomplished entrepreneur, he's like, maybe that's not the right way to put it, but maybe just what was my purpose? What did I want to accomplish? And so I want to turn that question to you, and I'm still working on the best way to re-ask that. But if you're looking back on your life, what would be that purpose that you wanted to have had, the impact that you wanted to have made?
To enable people with gifts to be able to pull those gifts out of themselves and allow themselves to be in a state to optimize those to ultimately change the world.
Awesome. I love that. I think within everybody, there's some gifts, and some of us are lucky enough to find them early on and, go all in on them. And some of us find them later on. But I think if we can dive in and really figure out what those things are, and then someone like you to help us both figure that out and figure out the tools to get them there, that's amazing. So appreciate you and all you do and all the amazing information that you share. Thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you so much for having me, Natalie. I appreciate it.